Good evening and welcome to this week's midweek reflection. I've actually got a shirt and tie on. I haven't put a shirt and tie on for at least 2 months. Well, especially since lockdown has happened, and I'm feeling rather uncomfortable. I haven't really enjoyed wearing slacks around the house quite a lot. However, I've got a little trick for those who are doing these reflections. You can still wear your pajama bottoms on underneath. So yeah, let's not tell anyone. It's been a real joy seeing so many from our church family bring us reflections, sermons, leading us in prayer, and also bringing the word of God directly into our lounges or wherever you're watching the services, whether that's your kitchen, your garden, or even your bathroom. And not only is it helping us stay connected, but it's an opportunity for us all to be a Lloyd Grossman or a Keith Lemon, have a quick peek through the keyhole and inside other people's homes. This evening, I've got a picture frame which is never there. It's a totally different part of the house. Got some flowers, however, they are dead, and fake candles in the background just to light them up, just to try and beat Stu, Stu's got a great background. I'm loving all his wooden logs and everything. So if there was an award for best set design, I think Stu would very much get it, don't you? Charles Spurgeon said, "The mind can descend far lower than the body, for in it there are bottomless pits. The flesh can bear only a certain number of wounds and no more, but the soul can bleed in 10,000 ways and die over and over again each hour." We're facing a crisis. This crisis, unlike COVID-19, has been with us for millennia, and it's not getting any better. Mental illness is widespread throughout communities across the globe. 1 in 4 adults will experience mental health problems. To put that into perspective, of the entire population of Northern Ireland, it's the combinations of those who live in Belfast, Derry, Ballymena and Ballymoney. And unfortunately, Northern Ireland has the highest levels of mental health in the whole of the UK. More people have died because of it in the last 17 years than the total number of deaths caused throughout the 30 years of the Troubles. A recent study suggests that over half of clergy are burnt out. One of the many reasons we need to continue to pray for our leaders, for protection on Andrew, Brian and Stu. Supporting them is essential as they oversee our spiritual needs. It reminds me of the story in Exodus when Moses was on the hillside overlooking the battle between the Israelites and the Amalekites. Moses was the spiritual leader and supporter of Joshua, who was leading the Israelite army. As long as Moses held up the staff in his hand, the Israelites had the advantage. But whenever he dropped his hand, the Amalekites gained the advantage. But Moses' arms soon became so tired he could no longer hold them up. So Aaron and Hur found a stone for him to sit on. Then they stood on each side of Moses, holding up his hands. So his hands held steady until sunset. As a result, Joshua overwhelmed the army of Amalek in battle. This is biblical proof of what can be achieved in supporting one another. And I know truly how we're in such a loving community here in this parish, how we are supporting one another. The phone calls, the texts and messages on Facebook have been so appreciated. We live in a parish that loves one another. And let's continue to be an Aaron or a Hur, continue to support each other, and we will come out of this battle as victors. However, there is no denying that this period of time is difficult for so many of us. I'm not an expert on mental health, and I have no formal training or qualifications. But what I do have is experience. Just over 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with clinical depression and anxiety, and I know at first hand how it can destroy peace. I'm no longer on medication, no longer receiving counselling, and I'm feeling so much better. But I still experience from time to time what I call my blancmange brain episode, or as Winston Churchill called it, his black dog. For me, being told by my doctor that there was a reason for what I was experiencing and feeling came as a great relief. It totally changed my outlook on my life, the way I worked, my relationship with family and friends, and also the relationship I had with God. I would say I'm closer to God now than I was before being diagnosed. And although I would never want to go back to those dark days, that period taught me a huge lesson on how society at times gets mental health so very wrong. And actually, how as a church at times, we also get it wrong too. There are lots of unhelpful ideas and philosophies behind mental health, and annoyingly stigmas too. And those stigmas I once shared. I was blinded to what was going on in family and friends' lives. For the friend who would back out minutes before you were due to have a night out. The colleague who overreacted to the stresses and demands of work. Or a member of the church family who would seem distant and uninterested when perhaps they used to throw themselves into church life. And if I'm being really honest, those three descriptions were actually what I went through. I was that person. The World Health Organization expect mental illness cases to rise considerably over the next year because of the recent lockdown measures. People are scared, anxious, losing sleep over money, mourning the loss of loved ones, feeling isolated and lonely. And you may live with some of those feelings, or live with someone who may be going through no fault of their own those exact same things and going through black dog moments. How we live our lives as Christians is tough when it comes to mental health. When the Bible shows us that we are forgiven, we are loved, and there is hope, it's the opposite of what's going on in our minds, that of helplessness, feeling unloved, hopelessness. The Archbishop of Canterbury's daughter, Catherine Welby Roberts, suffers from mental illness. In her recent book, she says, "The Bible contradicts almost everything I say about myself. It says I am worthy of love. It says I'm unique and valuable. It says I'm of incomparable value to God. If I believe in God and believe what he says, then I must start to believe this of myself. However, how do you change a lifetime of habits of believing that you are the opposite of all these things?" There's no wonder that nearly a third of British Christians who suffer with poor mental health say their illness prevents their ability to live like a Christian. I find that horrific, but I know it myself, so something must change. When I was going through my darkest period, people would recite Bible passages that were in all essence supportive, but actually made me feel far worse than I was feeling at the time. Things like, "The Lord's yoke is an easy one," or "Fear not." It would have garnered the same reaction to someone telling me to buck your ideas up and pull yourself together. Other people have it so much worse than you. It would have put pressure on me to change, but as much as I wanted to, I couldn't change. C.S. Lewis wrote, "You are one of the poor whom he blessed. He knows what a wretched machine you are trying to drive. Keep on, do what you can. One day he will fling it on the scrap heap and give you a new one. And then you may astonish us all, not least yourself, for you have learned your driving in a hard school." When I started to feel better, I read as much as I possibly could on faith and mental health, and I was reassured and shocked that so many successful people suffered and still suffer with it. I felt that I had to talk openly about it with others, and that's why I'm perhaps so candid about it this evening. And when I talk about it, I find that others are suffering too, and a support mechanism is established. I remember so many times the faces on people when I tell them that I suffer with depression and anxiety. There's a relief on their face, them saying, "Oh, I thought I was the only one." Well, friends, if you are struggling in this very moment in time, you're not the only one, and you're definitely not alone. Remember I said I found it difficult to read and hear Bible passages such as "The Lord's yoke is an easy one," or "Fear not." One thing that did help me and helps me to this very day is that God does help us through his word. First of all, it shows that some of our biblical heroes suffered too. And more than that, it reflects some of our own struggles. Noah, after spending a year in isolation on the ark, came out and got drunk, unable to move or losing any sense of the things around him. David felt guilt. In Psalm 38, he says, "My guilt overwhelms me. It's a burden too heavy to bear." Job, with all the things he went through, said, "I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, but only turmoil." And both Elijah and Jonah felt suicidal, crying out to God to take their lives. And through these stories, although these people were struggling, we can see that God was never far away from them. For Jonah, feeling suicidal, God grew a plant around him to protect him from the harshness of what the world would throw at him. For me, that's a picture of God wrapping his arms around us, hugging us, protecting us, saying, "I am here for you." And for Elijah, who exhausted, probably suffering from post-traumatic stress, could only sleep, God provided an angel to provide him with food and drink. It tells me that God gives us the provisions to carry on the journey ahead. Elijah and Jonah, for when they were at their darkest periods, they were both isolated, alone, burnt out, exhausted, worried, angry. not knowing what to do. God went to them, tenderly, lovingly, giving them both what they needed at exactly the right time. Religion wasn't being forced onto them, but a loving relationship was unfolding in the wilderness. I remember crying out when I was at my darkest period, "Where is God in all of this?" To me, he felt distant, but on reflection, I see exactly where he was. He was exactly where I needed him. He was right by me. Although quiet, he was guiding me carefully, calmly, lovingly through the valley of death. And God knows exactly what those struggles feel like. In all his perfectness, Jesus still felt anxious. He felt afraid. He became troubled. He felt ashamed. He became depressed. There was sadness. There was distress. At times, he became overwhelmed. He felt physical and mental pain. He suffered and he became exhausted. For me, these are truths that show that our God knows too well what life can be like for us. He's felt the same pains that we feel today. The Bible openly discusses topics of anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress, loneliness, and other psychiatric disorders. If the Bible talks candidly, then so can we. Mental illness is not a new phenomenon, and unfortunately, it's not going away. Some of you may be aware that I'm a TV producer, and several years ago I made a film about an event during World War II where over 400 men lost their lives in one tragic incident. I interviewed a survivor of that event, and as he came into the interview room and sat down, he told me quite matter of fact, "I've never needed any psychiatrist. I've never needed to talk about it to anyone. My generation are tougher than today's daisies." And maybe so, but as I started interviewing him, he started to weep and cry uncontrollably. For that gentleman had never talked about what happened to him to anyone, and that was the first time he cried about his loss in over 70 years. Let's continue to be a church that talks to one another, asking how each of us are doing, allowing time for response, accepting that for many they're struggling, and continue to pray for each other, as I know you're doing. Please remember, you are not alone, and you are loved by those in this church community and by Jesus Christ himself. And with my TV hat on, if any of you have been affected by any of the issues in tonight's reflection, there is help available. Blessings to you all.